voilà, il va durer un certain temps. Donc bonjour tout le monde, merci d'être avec
Good
nous
evening, everyone. Thank you
pour ce
for
cours
joining us for this class, which is
qui
the
va parler en
last
fait
of
du
the
cycle La
cycle,
disparition
the disappearance of
des
the
Juifs du
Jews in
Moyen-Orient
the
en
Middle
partenariat avec
East,
ISGAP,
East
Academ, la
in
LICRA et le réseau de
partnership with
recherche
ISGAP, LICRA,
RRA.
and the research
Pour
network
l'année 1, nous
RRA.
avons le
We
plaisir
have
de
the pleasure
recevoir
today to
Monsieur Sylvain
welcome
Abitbol,
Mr.
donc,
Sylvain
qui est
Abitbol, who's
marocain, enfin, d'origine marocaine
of Moroccan
et
and
canadien.
Canadian origin.
Et donc,
He is
c'est
an
un
expert
expert
in
dans plusieurs
several
domaines. Et de toute
areas,
façon, le fait qu'il a
living on the
une
fact
solide
that
carrière
he
d'ingénieur
has
et
a very
d'entrepreneur
strong
dans
career
l'industrie de la
as an engineer
télécommunication et
and
qui a
an
fait
entrepreneur
des
in
études
the
reliées
telecommunication
à ce
industry,
domaine,
and that he
est
studied
surtout
in this
invité
sense.
ici ce
Is
soir
here?
parce que
He was
non
invited
seulement
tonight,
déjà c'est un
not
Juif
only
d'origine
because he's
marocaine, donc il a
a
toute la
Moroccan Jew,
dimension du
and so
vécu
it
et
has all the
du
dimension of
témoignage
his
en lui.
experience and
Et il est aussi
his
surtout
witness,
un
but
militant
mostly is a
impliqué dans les
militant
affaires juives
implied in
canadiennes
Canadian
et
Jewish
plus
affairs and
particulièrement
specifically
québécoises,
Quebecois,
et
and is a
président de la
president
fédération
of the
CJA de Montréal depuis 2004
Federation CGA
et
of
président
Montreal
du
since
Congrès juif canadien.
2004.
Il
He
l'a été
was
de
a co-president of the
2007 à
Canadian
2009,
Jewish
si je ne me
Congress
trompe pas.
from 2007
Il a aussi écrit un
2009. He
roman
also wrote a
qui
novel
parle de
talking about
son
his
expérience qui
experience
s'appelle
called
Minuit moins 5,
Minuit moins
qui
cinq
raconte son
that
parcours.
tells about his
Et
journey,
il a
and
gagné donc
he
plusieurs
earned several
prix.
awards.
Donc la médaille Samuel
The
Bronfman,
Samuel
c'est un prix
Bronfman Medal,
honorifique en
which
fait de
is
la
an
fédération CGA.
honorific prize of
Ce
CGA
prix en fait il
Federation,
récompense
and
l'investissement d'une
that
personne dans la communauté
rewards
juive
investment of a person in
canadienne.
the
Et il a
Jewish
aussi
Canadian
remporté le
community. He
prix
also
Queen
won
Elizabeth
the
II
prize, the Elizabeth II
Jubilee
Award,
Medal, qui est
Jubilee
un prix
Medals,
qui remercie une personne pour sa
thanking
contribution à la
someone for
communauté
their
égale.
contribution to the community.
C'est un
He is an
expert en fait
expert in
des dispositifs juridiques
legal
qui peuvent être
disposition
mis en
that can
place
be
quant à
implemented
la spoliation des Juifs
regarding the
du
Middle
Moyen-Orient, et
Eastern
c'est ce qu'il va
Jews
nous raconter dans cette
spoliation. And that's
passionnante
what he'll tell about
présentation
in
qui vous
this
attend. Je vous
exciting
donne la parole et
presentation.
puis
I'll
vous
give
allez
you the floor.
présenter et
You're going
ensuite
to
suivront
present,
des
and then there
questions
will
en
be
fonction
questions
de nos
regarding,
participants.
depending on
Merci
our
beaucoup.
attendees.
Merci
Thank
beaucoup,
you
Erika.
very
J'ai été
much,
président, je ne
Erika.
suis pas
I was
président de la
president of the
fédération. Ce sont des
federation
mandats de
because there are
2 ans.
only 2-year mandates.
Donc, ce
So
sont
there are
2 ans
there were 2 years
qui s'unissent
that
comme ça, 10 ans. C'est pour ça.
count as 10 because it's a lot of work. I
Je vais
just
juste
wanted to
partager
share my
mon
screen. I'm
écran.
just going to share my screen.
OK.
Can you
Vous
see
me voyez?
it?
Attendez.
Okay,
OK, we're in
now
business.
we're in
Est-ce que vous
business.
voyez
Can you
bien
see
mon
my
écran?
screen?
C'est
Perfect,
parfait,
thank you.
merci.
Parfait.
Perfect.
Alors,
So
peut-être
maybe a little
background
background
sur sur ce
what I
que je
will
vais vous
present
présenter.
you. When
Lorsque
I
j'étais, comme vous l'avez
was,
dit,
as you
Erika,
mentioned,
j'étais
Erika, I was
président du Congrès
president of
juif
the
canadien.
Jewish
J'ai
Canadian
élevé une
Congress. I
place
automatically
principalement dans
had
Justice for
a
Jews, un Arab
spot
Parties.
in Justice for
Donc,
Jews,
une
which is
institution qui est une
an
coalition
international
internationale qui
coalition
regroupe beaucoup
with a
d'agences
lot of
membres et
agents and
partenaires à travers le
partners
monde,
throughout the world,
dont l'objectif
and
est la
whose
défense
aim
des
is
Juifs
to
chrétiens.
defend Jews in Arab countries.
Lorsque j'ai
When
fini
I
mon
finished my
mandat, on m'a
mandate,
demandé
I
d'être dans
was
l'exécutif
asked
et je
to
suis
be
devenu
in the
coprésident
executive
avec
branch, and I
Arabadi.
became later a
Et à
co-president
ce
with
moment-là,
Arabadi. And at
nous
that
avions une
point, we
seule
only had
mission,
one mission. It was
c'était
to
d'obtenir le droit
ensure
de réfugié pour les
to
Juifs arabes.
obtain the
C'est ce
right
que nous
of
avons fait
refugees
pendant une
for
bonne dizaine
the
d'années,
Jews from Arabic
avec des
countries. That's what we
présentations.
did
J'ai
for
parlé aux
about
Nations
10
Unies
years with
à Genève,
presentations. I
aux droits
talked
de
at
l'homme
the UN
à
in
New York,
Geneva,
et la
at
présentation
the
politique au niveau du
human
gouvernement
rights in New
canadien,
York,
du
political
gouvernement américain,
representations at the Canadian government level and
du House of
American
Lords en
level,
Angleterre,
um,
et pour
and in
arriver à
England,
un
and to
statut
get
des réfugiés et les Juifs
refugee
chrétiens arabes.
status for the
Alors, je
Jews
vais
in Arab countries. So I'm
présenter ça un
going to,
peu le
that's
background de
a
tout
little
ça
bit
avant
the
de passer à
background
la
of all
deuxième
this
phase. Qu'est-ce qu'on
before
fait
moving on
après?
to the second
Donc, la mission pour
stage. What do we
l'ICAF,
do? Our
c'est de
mission
faire
is
en
to
sorte que la
ensure that
justice pour
justice
les
for
Juifs et
Jews
les
in Arab
Arabes prenne sa
countries
place
finds its
dans
rightful
l'agenda
place on
politique
the
et stratégique
international, political,
international
and legal
et que leurs
agenda,
droits
and
sont
that their rights
respectés
are
sur la loi et
respected
le principe
according to the laws and the
d'équité. Je crois que ça
principle
peut
of
pas être plus
equity.
d'actualité
It
que
couldn't
ce
be
jour
more
d'aujourd'hui.
current than it is today. So a little history on the High Commission of Refugees. On two occasions, the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees determined that Jews fleeing Arab countries were refugees, and it's important to say so. There are two types of refugees. We're only talking about one class, who are the Arab refugees. We don't want to remove that right from them, but ours shouldn't be removed. Ours should not be removed either. Another urgent problem
Le Haut Commissaire des Nations Unies, on peut lire sa quote. Un autre problème urgent se pose, celui des
that
pays
of
provenant
refugees
d'Égypte.
coming from
Et donc, quasi
Egypt.
dans mon esprit,
These
les réfugiés
refugees
relèvent du mandat. Ça, c'est au niveau
answer
de
to
l'Égypte.
the
Donc,
mandate
pour
of
la
my
précision,
office, and that's
la
for
seule
Egypt.
compensation
The only
que les Juifs
compensation that the
arabes
Jews
pouvaient
in Arab
avoir,
countries
c'est un
had
prêt de
was
10 000
a
dollars
loan of
à des
$10,000
Juifs
to
égyptiens pour
some
qu'ils quittent
Egyptian
certains
Jews
Juifs
so
arabes.
that they may leave Egypt. That's the only thing we
Au
obtained.
niveau aussi
In terms of
de la Libye,
Libya as well,
on a cette reconnaissance que les Juifs de Libye
we
aussi
acknowledge as well that
sont
Jews
considérés
in
comme des
Libya
juifs
are considered to be
réfugiés.
refugees as well.
Représentation politique
Political
que nous avons
representations
aujourd'hui
we have
dans le
today
cadre de
are
Nations Unies,
UN,
l'UNESCO
UNESCO,
et le
and
Parlement
the
européen.
European Parliament.
Représentation
Political
politique.
representations, as I
Comme je
said
l'ai dit tout à
earlier,
l'heure, nous avons fait des
we
représentations politiques au
represented
niveau des
politically
États-Unis, du
in the
Canada,
United States, in
du
Canada, in the
Royaume-Uni,
United Kingdom,
la
in France,
France,
in
la
Belgium, in
Belgique,
Italy,
l'Italie,
in
l'Union
European
européenne et
Union
la Russie.
as well.
Peu de
Very
gens
few
le
people
savent.
know that.
Au niveau
In
des
terms of
audiences
formal
d'amende
government
forfaitaire,
hearings, I
j'ai fait personnellement une
personally
présentation
gave a
aux droits de l'homme
presentation
à
at the
Genève,
human rights in
aux
Geneva,
États-Unis. J'ai
in the
négocié
United
avec
States. I also negotiated with the Mr. Tom Ladders.
qui nous a
May God
guidés pour avoir une résolution bipartisane
save
du
his
Congrès
souls.
américain
He guided
qui
us for a
reconnaît que les Juifs étaient bien
bipartisan
là, sont des
resolution
réfugiés.
in the American Congress
J'ai
that
témoigné
recognizes
personnellement
that
aux
Jews in
parlementaires
Arab
anglais,
countries are refugees.
au
I
Parlement de
witnessed,
l'Angleterre et à
I
la Chambre des députés
testified
angleterre.
personally in the Canadian Parliament in England
Alors
and in
cette
the Deputy
référence,
Chamber in
cette
Italy.
résolution dont je vous
So
parlais
this
tout à l'heure, c'est la
resolution
résolution
is resolution
185
185
qui
that says
dit
that
que
any
toute
explicit
référence
reference to the
explicite aux
rights
droits
of
des Juifs
Palestinian
palestiniens
refugees
doit
must be
être
accompanied
accompagnée d'une
by a
référence
similar
similaire
reference to
aux
the
droits
rights
des
of Jewish
juifs et
refugees from
arabes.
Arab
C'est
countries. It's a resolution
résolution
that
qui a
was
été signée
signed, that's
bipartisane
bipartisan,
et qui
and
est
that's
dans
in
les
the
archives
archives of
de la
the
Chambre des représentants
reps
aux Nations Unies. Et la
representative
conséquence
chamber
directe,
in the
c'est
United
toutes les
Nations. And the
concessions
direct
doivent
consequence
tenir doivent
that all
tenir compte
negotiation
de cette
must
référence.
take into account these elements.
Alors, à la
At the
Knesset, en
Knesset in
2010, c'est évident que
2010,
la Knesset a
of
voté
course,
pour
it's
ce
going
genre
to
de
vote for
choses. Dans le
them.
cadre quoique,
Although we
nous
had
avons eu des
some
réticences
people
de la Knesset
reluctant, who were
pour
reluctant at
reconnaître que
the
les
Knesset to
Juifs de ce
recognize
pays
that
arabe soient réfugiés.
Jews in Arab
Et
countries were
finalement,
refugees,
en
but in
2010, on a eu,
2010,
dans le cadre de ces
as part of
négociations,
this
le
negotiation, the
gouvernement
government
envisagera
will consider
de compenser à
compensating
l'actif
the loss of
les
assets
pertes
of
actives des réfugiés
Jewish
juifs et
refugees
arabes
from Arab countries
dans le cadre des
as
négociations.
part of the negotiations.
Au niveau du
In
Parlement
terms of the
canadien,
Parliament of Canada,
encore une fois, c'est une
again, it's an
reconnaissance officielle
official
du statut des
acknowledgement
Juifs
of the status of
des pays
the
arabes.
Jews in Arab countries.
Alors là, vous avez
Here you
un
have
portrait de la
a
population
table
des
of the
Juifs des pays arabes.
population of Jews from Arab
On est à peu près
countries.
à 1
There's
million en
about 1
1948
million in
et
1948,
aujourd'hui,
and
nous sommes à
today
8
there's
556. On voit vraiment que
1,556. So we can see
le
the
déclin
decline
de
of
la
the Jewish
population juive
population,
est évident.
and it's obvious.
On est
We all
tous partis.
left.
Au niveau des
As
résolutions,
far as
je crois
resolutions
qu'on
go,
n'est pas
we're not
étonné de
surprised to
savoir au
know
niveau
that
du
in
Conseil de
terms of the
sécurité,
Security Council,
il y a eu
there were
338 résolutions pour le
338
Moyen-Orient,
resolutions on the
9
Middle East, 9
pour les
for
réfugiés
Palestinian
palestiniens
refugees
et
and
0
zero for
pour
the Jewish
les juifs.
refugees.
Au niveau du Conseil
In
de
terms of the
sécurité,
Security
au
Council,
niveau de l'Assemblée générale, ça c'est
in
vraiment
terms of
critique.
General Assembly, that's critical,
976 résolutions
976
au niveau de
resolutions,
l'Assemblée générale des
208
Nations Unies, 208
for
pour les Palestiniens
Palestinians,
et
and
0.
zero.
Parlons donc de l'injustice.
So let's talk about injustice.
La résolution
Resolution
242
242
propose un
suggests
juste règlement du
a
problème
just
des
settlement
réfugiés.
of the refugee problem. So
Parlons
let's talk
donc de
about
la
the definition
définition
of
d'un
a
réfugié.
refugee.
Qui est un
What's a
réfugié?
refugee? A
Un
refugee
réfugié est quelqu'un craignant avec raison
having found a well-founded fear of being persecuted for reasons of race, religion, nationality, membership of a particular social group, of a political opinion. He is outside the country of their nationality and is unable, owing to such fear, is unwilling to avail himself of the protection of that country. It's an international convention that was established in 1951, not only for the Jews, but it's a general definition. And as you can tell, it applies to the situation of the Jews from Arab countries. Let's talk about UN agencies serving Palestinian refugees. There are 10 agencies, and they're refugees. They have been refugees from generation to generation. You have a list here, it's here. We really think that there's a disconnect between the two types of refugees. In terms of Palestine, UNRWA, and the equivalent for the Palestinian refugees keep their refugee status from generation to generation, but not for the Jews. Once you're dead, your children are not entitled to this status. Why is that? We don't really know. In terms of citizenship, even if a Palestinian acquires a new nationality, they keep the status of a refugee, whereas a Jew who changes their nationality loses their refugee status. In terms of the revolutions, 175 for Palestinians, 0 for Jews. In times of urgencies, 10 for Palestinians, 1 for Jews. And now let's talk about the worst. Palestinians got $13.71 million restitution when Jews, for Jews, this quantity is negligible. In terms of the staff, you have one staff per 43 refugees for Palestinians and one staff per 1,579 Jewish refugees. You also have statements by heads of state. We can see President Jimmy Carter, who was no friend of the Jews, but still accepted reality. Same for Bill Clinton. But Clinton, let's be honest. You have the Clinton Foundation that's worth $40 billion that's available today for the resolution of the Israelo-Palestinian conflict. It's a source of funds that we think of using in terms of settlement between Palestinians and Israel that takes into account the losses, the Palestinian losses and the Jewish Palestinian and the Jewish losses equally. Similar resolution for Canadian, for the First Minister, who I knew personally, and from First Minister Theresa May in 2017. So after this event, following this event, we moved on to a second phase. We got an anonymous donation to create an exhaustive report to analyze the goods the Jews had been deprived of in Arab countries. We selected a firm who, after 4 years, came to about 10 books, one per country, with the history of the Jews in this country, the contribution of the Jews in this country, and the losses. Of course, today, the narrative of the Palestinians is that Jews are not indigenous, they are not refugees, they are not entitled to this loss. So the aim of this publication is first to prove that Jews are indigenous historically, that they are refugees because they were excluded and deported from certain countries, and of course that we have assets that were perturbed. The first report that was issued was for the Jews in Syria. Today, out of the 30,000 Jews from Syria, we estimate $10 million of lost assets. So we calculated rural assets, urban assets, employment losses. That's about 2 years of salary, all the movable assets and private property, business losses, communal losses. So the $200+ million in 1947 is estimated on a mathematical basis to $10 million. That's a lot of money. We did the same thing with Iraq, where we see that we have $34 billion. That's huge, absolutely huge. For Egypt, one of the most thriving communities, the report on Egypt shows the impact of the Jews in Egypt. They built the bank system, they built the cinema industry with very striking examples that show losses going up to almost $60 billion. The Iran report hasn't come out yet officially, but I'll talk to you about it. We had a problem with Iran in the sense that all the other reports give names, family names, names of people operating businesses. But for Iran, since there's about 15,000 Jews in Iran, we had a report that could maybe endanger the Iranian Jews. We consulted the representatives of Iranian communities in America who saw our reports, who asked her to make it anonymous and to remove the names, but to publish the report. And today we're talking about $61 billion in Iran. These are exhaustive reports. Each report, each book is about 100 pages. And so far, that's what we have. And following that, we hired a firm to create social networks. We're just going to see a little film.
In a meeting with the U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken, Egypt's President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi claimed Jews live peacefully in Egypt. But in
En
1947,
1947, le délégué égyptien voulait la réduction d'une...
would provoke massacres against Jews in Arab nations. Just a year later, bombs killed over 70 Jews in Cairo. Hundreds more were injured or arrested. Then came the laws proposed by the Arab League. Jews were stripped of their citizenship, businesses, and homes, forced to leave with nothing.
So they said, you are Zionists, you are enemies of this country, so we confiscate all your assets. And they did.
This document, a one-way ticket out. Forced exile, not peaceful coexistence. So, was el-Sisi right when he said Egypt treated its Jews well? History says otherwise. In a meeting with the U.S. Secretary of State...
So we produced a series of vignettes at this effect, covering several topics in order to counterattack the Palestinian narrative. We have some vignettes on the status of Dhimmi, on the authenticity of Jews as indigenous, and a whole series of vignettes, and we produce them also in Arabic. So it's interesting that we have an influencer whose name is Dick Cohen and who's based in Israel, who has 1 million views on his social media. And when we produced in Arabic some of these vignettes, we had up to 200,000 views in Arab countries. I wouldn't say everything was positive, but we still have some interesting reactions, feedback. So that's what we're trying to do today. We are planning at the next Assembly of the United Nations in November 2025 to release all the books, to have a press conference. We have some very interesting feedback from a lot of Muslims, and it's interesting. We are analyzing all these reactions, all this feedback. our next step will be to have this translated in several languages, since it's done with AI, to translate the vignettes in different languages, and that will be relatively easy once the first series has happened. So we're on YouTube, on Instagram, on Facebook, on all the social media will have these vignettes. We're starting to have quite an interesting penetration, and that's what we're hoping for, is going to counteract the Palestinian narrative. That's it. Do you have any questions? Are there any questions? Thank you. Thank you very much for your presentation. I don't know if there are questions among our participants or among our attendees. I always have a question. Go ahead. Maybe that later it will initiate a movement. Usually that's what happens. So it's regarding, you know that the refugees, the Jewish refugees of the Arabo-Muslim world were not as pressured to leave. I'd like to know. I'll ask for a personal testimony, not necessarily speaking as an expert in your militant and legal activities, but did you feel a pressure on your family, on your communities, etc., that prompted you to leave? Were your assets taken, etc.? So Morocco is different. We decided consciously to produce a book on the history of Morocco, the contribution of the Jews in Morocco, but to remove completely the aspect of taken goods, because that did not happen. We left. No one prevented us from leaving. Those who did not have a passport, and I will talk about it later, were unable to leave. But the Moroccan Jews were treated as Muslims in terms of money. Their assets were not taken, but those who left lost their assets. There was a very tense climate in '67, very tense, with demonstrations on the street. These really were difficult times. I myself was involved in Zionist movements. The Jewish agency had sent representatives in Morocco to help the Jews leave Morocco by enabling them to be taken in trucks and left up to the north of Morocco, have false papers, so they were able to leave. I think that's the maximum we received in Morocco. Today, you have quite a thriving Jewish community in Morocco. There's about 250,000 Jews. You have a drone manufacturer in Morocco collaborating with Israel. Of course, there are demonstrations, but I went to Morocco several times, and I even saw some Moroccan Muslims who organized a trip to Israel and who testified of the extraordinary way they were welcomed in Israel. So Morocco is a bit different. But from testimonies from my colleagues in Libya, Regina Boardman was very touching, very moving. She was with me in Geneva, and she testified they almost lost their lives when they fled Egypt. You have Nadia Elana Zamir, who talked about the fact that they took away their citizenship. They were forced to leave. Some Jews were put in concentration camps. Same for Syria, same for Iraq. They took their assets. So I'm exposed to this time. I have been exposed to this type of testimony for a long time, and it's moving history. But I think the hardest is not what happened to us, because, you know, we just start working again. We did not make buses exploit or planes. When I arrived in Canada, I just started working, but what is not fair today is the fact that this story is not acknowledged, and that ONGs, all those that are against Israel, do not know this side of history. And our goal is to ensure that it will be represented. Are we talking to deaf people? Maybe. Are we going to change history? I don't know. But if we don't know, nothing will happen if we know. I have another question, unless someone else would like to speak. But as I said, maybe it's going to initiate more questions. You calculated the number of agencies regarding the question of Palestinian refugees. What is your explanation, whether it's political or pragmatic or economic? I'll tell you, there's a famous economist whose name is Thomas Sowell, Sowell. Is an exceptional historian and an exceptional economist. And he had an interview with a Jew, and he asked him, how can we explain anti-Semitism? What can we do? And Thomas Sowell answered, stop being successful. So is that how you explain why there's a big number of agencies for Palestinians? It's success, so it's a mirror, actually. You know, I'll give you a personal example. We had the first minister in Canada whose name was Stephen Harper, who was one of the prime ministers who supported Israel most, and his minister of immigration, who's a very good friend of mine, called me one day once he was president and said, Sylvain, I would like to come and visit you. I'd like to meet you with a couple of representatives of a Sephardic committee. I said, you must be at the Federation. He said, no, that has nothing to do. It's not in my agenda. This appointment is not official. I just have some questions for you. Perfect. So we meet on a Sunday afternoon. And she said, I have two populations, and it's one Canada. They look alike. We speak the same language. There's a community who comes and works, and another community that does nothing. Can you explain why? And we try to explain the difference, the different approach in terms of work, values, etc., and how we had organized as a society, the Jewish call, etc. And he told me, I have millions of dollars to give you if you show them how to adapt to a country. And we said, it's a waste of time. It's a reality. Today you have, it's a reaction. It's the $1 million question. How can we explain this state of mind? We do not allow Jews, we may be, I'm not a psychologist, but there's a phenomena. It's anti-Semitism that did not happen overnight. It's always existed. We maybe represent the human ideal, and when we cannot adapt to this ideal, you can only destroy this human ideal to give more value to your side. That's the only thing we can explain of Muslims. Nobody speaks. I think that it was Shuraki who said that a Muslim humanizes themselves only when they're killed by a Jew. Or, I don't know if he said that, but Darwish said something similar. The Palestinian who said that the Palestinian question, quote unquote, would never have been so much on media if there weren't Jews against them. And he said, we owe our notoriety to the Jewish question. I don't know how to explain this, but one thing is sure. We all left in 47 from the same point. We lost everything. I'm not taking away to the Palestinians the right to have lost whose assets were spoliated. Well, they left, regardless of the reason, there's damage. They're refugees, perfect. They were put in camps, but we weren't. We started working.
les rescapés de la Shoah,
The Shoah
ils n'ont pas fait
survivors,
sauter, ils n'ont
they
pas fait
did not
sauter
bomb
des vaisseaux
anything. With
avec
all
tout
the
le
trauma, the
traumatisme psychologique
psychological
qu'on a pu
trauma
par
that they
lequel on a
went
pu
through,
passer.
they
Ils se sont
started
mis à
working.
travailler.
They
Ils ont monté des
started
compagnies.
building
Ils ont bâti
companies,
des bibliothèques.
businesses.
Ils ont financé des
They
universités.
finance
Il y a un grand
universities.
hôpital à Montréal
There's
qui
a
s'appelle
big
l'hôpital général.
hospital in Montreal
Il a été
called the
créé
Jewish General
parce que
Hospital,
médecins
which was
juifs n'avaient
created
pas le
because
droit
Jewish
d'exercer dans
doctors
les
were
hôpitaux de
not
la
allowed
province de
to
Québec.
practice in Quebec
Alors, on
province
aurait pu
hospital. So we could
s'énerver.
have
On dit
been
non. Tu
mad.
bâtis
And
notre
we
propre
said, no, we're
hôpital et
going
aujourd'hui c'est
to
un fleuron
build our own hospital. And
dans
today it's a
le centre
reference
au Québec.
in
Donc c'est un
health
petit peu ce que nous
in
faisons.
Quebec
Le
Health.
maire de Toronto,
The mayor
quelques
of
années,
Toronto a
a
few
fait une
years ago
présentation
gave a presentation
en disant
saying
il n'y a
there
pas
isn't
une rue à
one
Toronto où on passe
street
où on ne
where
voit
you
pas
don't see the
l'impact de la
impact of the
communauté.
Jewish community
À tous les niveaux. À
at
tous les
every
niveaux.
level.
Et c'est un
And
petit peu ce qui m'a
that's
valu
what
la médaille
earned me
récipiendaire de la médaille de
the
la reine
medal of
Elisabeth II,
Queen Elizabeth
le jubilé
II and the
de
Jubilee of
la
the
reine d'Angleterre.
Queen,
C'est un petit peu cela.
Queen of England.
C'est une
That's one
éducation
of
que
the
nous avons.
reasons. It's an
Et c'est ce qui a
education
fait
that
que
we
ce
have, and
pays
that's
d'Israël
why
est
this
dans le
world of
patrimoine
Israel
exceptionnel.
has become a
Exceptionnel.
miracle. It's an exceptional
Ok, j'ai une
human
dernière
lab.
question.
I have a
Vous
last
avez parlé,
question.
enfin
No,
non, il y en a
we have
deux
two
petites questions.
questions.
C'est qui cet influenceur juif? Eddie Cohen?
Who is
Eddie
this
Cohen,
Jewish
regardez.
influencer, Eddie
D'accord.
Cohen?
Et
Yes.
donc
And
la
so the
Fondation
Clinton
Sylvain nous
Foundation
parlait
was talking
de
about, yes,
Oui, alors
I'd like
j'aimerais élaborer
to
là-dessus. Donc bonjour David, il est là.
thank you. Hello,
Là, je voulais
David.
parler aussi
I
de
see
des liens qu'on va avoir
this.
avec David. Euh,
The
la
foundation,
Fondation
the Clinton
Clinton,
Foundation,
et nous avons une
and we have
avenue.
an avenue.
J'ai
I
eu des
had
discussions
some
avec
conversation
le
with
gouvernement
the
d'Israël. En
Israeli
fait,
government.
comme
As
vous
you
savez,
know,
c'est
on
un
November
programme de la journée
30th,
dédiée
it's the
à
day
l'exode des Juifs des pays arabes.
dedicated to the exodus of the Jews from Arab
Moi-même, c'était
country.
Norman, Adi
Myself,
Abadi,
Norman, and
Abadi, qui
Adi
avons négocié à la
Al-Badi,
Knesset
who
cette
negotiated at
loi-là. Et
the
donc,
Knesset at this
la
date,
loi n'est
and
pas issue d'un
the
document qui a
law
été
is
signé par
based
nous
on a
trois.
document that was signed by the three of us.
Et
And
le, 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 tout, tout ce qui est au niveau de... Ah, j'ai perdu mon fil de
I'm
pensée, je
sorry,
m'excuse.
I lost my
Répétez la
train of
question.
thought. What was the
C'était quoi la
question
Donc
again?
question?
la
La
Fondation
Clinton
Clinton, en fait, ça
Foundation.
allait vous servir de
So
dispositif
Alors
de
justement,
financement.
lorsque j'ai finalisé la
when
signature,
we
la
finalized the
ministre va me
signature,
demander,
the minister
Sylvain, what do
asked
you
me,
think
what
we
do you
have?
think we're going to do now? I
Alors je dis
said,
que
I
moi
imagine
j'imagine
that
un plan
a
d'action
Marshall Plan, sort of a Marshall Plan,
utilisant
using
la Fondation Clinton
Clinton Foundation
et une résolution, une
and the
résolution de
conflict
conflit.
resolution.
Plus maintenant.
Harvard,
Harvard est
not
une
anymore, but
université
Harvard
qui
was
s'est
a
spécialisée dans la
university that
résolution de
was
conflits.
specialized in
Prendre un centre
conflict
universitaire
resolution,
où on
to
mettrait des
take a
Juifs et des
university
Palestiniens
center
pour
where
essayer
you
pour
would put
résoudre le
Jews and
conflit
Palestinians to try and solve this
partager
conflict and to
enveloppe de
share
40
this
milliards de
envelope
dollars
of
pour un plan
$40
Marshall pour
billion dollars
les Palestiniens.
to
C'était un petit
create
peu ce
sort of
que
a
Trump veut
Marshall
faire,
Plan for
mais l'idée est là.
Palestinians. That's a little bit what
Et
Trump
cette
wants to
fondation
do, but
existe toujours. Bon.
this foundation still exists. I'd
Je voudrais
like to
profiter que David
take
soit là pour
advantage
dire
of
que
David's presence to say
avec
that with
David
David Dahan, we
nous avons
created
créé
another
une autre antenne qui est Jet Jack France. Et vraiment, David fait un
anthem
travail
that is
exceptionnel
Jet Jack France,
au
and
niveau de la
David
représentation
does an
politique,
exceptional
de la
work in terms of
politique
political representation
de ce qu'on
and
peut faire,
political
des actions
claim of what
politiques,
we
des actions
could do,
légales
political actions, legal
qui
actions
avancent.
that
Voilà.
move forward. I
J'ai
did
pas
not
compris le
understand
nom.
the name
J.
Jack
Jack?
France.
France,
D'accord.
Jet Jack
J.
France.
Jack France.
D'accord, ok.
Okay.
On a aussi
In
en Suisse.
Switzerland, we also have an
Nous faisons
alliance
alliance
with
avec
Khadif.
Khalif
In
en
England,
Angleterre,
with Jim
avec Jim
Mena
Mena
in
en Californie.
California.
Donc, c'est un
So
petit peu les
these are our
différentes
different
sociétés, c'est une grande organisation sympa.
societies,
Ok,
different
bon, en fait, moi,
organizations.
j'aurais
I'd
1000
have
questions. Bon, David, c'est bon.
1,000
Si 10
questions. So
personnes ont
if
des
other people
questions,
have questions,
sinon, comme
otherwise,
vous êtes
since
passionnés, je
you're,
pourrais parler
it's
3 heures.
very
Alors,
exciting, I could speak
juste,
for it. Thank you,
merci
Sylvain,
Sylvain
for
pour
your
ton introduction.
introduction.
Vous
Can you
m'entendez?
hear me? Yes, very
Oui,
well.
oui.
Thank
Oui,
you
merci
for
Sylvain
your
pour ton introduction.
introduction.
Je viens de
I
donner
just
une
gave an
interview sur
interview on
I24 à l'instant.
I-24.
Nice.
Voilà,
Nice.
qui
That's
passe en
going
boucle
to
donc
be on
sur
loop in
cette chaîne
this
d'information continue. Donc
continuous
voilà, alors ça a
news
duré
can
5
channel.
minutes avant qu'ils me
It
coupent parce qu'ils
lasts
avaient
five
beaucoup
minutes
d'actualités
before
à
they cut
traiter.
me off
C'est
because
comment
they
ça
had
se
a
passe
lot
sur les
of things
chaînes
to talk
d'information
about. You know
continue.
how it is
En
on
tout cas, l'essentiel, c'est
continuous
d'avoir fait
news.
parler
What's important that we made talk about us. I'd like to talk about an action that we're leading, but the action we're leading right now is with the deputy of the National Assembly in France. We wrote about about 100 deputies. Yeah, I saw this text. It's exceptional. It's extraordinary. Thank you. I will share the letter if you want. Yes, you should send it because it takes a lawyer to do things well, and it's condensed. Everything's good. I'll give you the floor, Olga. Thank you. And so we're doing an action with the deputies asking for the National Assembly to vote recognizing what we call the Akira. Akira in Hebrew means uprooting. We didn't want to name that Anekba because Anekba is military catastrophe, and that's the name a Syrian journalist gave in 1948, the day after Akba. It was a military defeat. It's a Syrian journalist who gave this name, except that you had six Arabic armies attacking Israel, except that for us, we didn't have six Jewish states that attacked Tunisia, Algeria, Iraq, Libya, etc., etc. So we really were civilians. We experienced an ethnical cleansing, and what we ask is for the National Assembly to recognize the Hakira first point. And the second point is to teach it in school books, because if we want to fight against anti-Semitism, it's important to say that there were Jews in Arab countries and in Iran who were there before the Arabs and before Islam, and who were rejected by these same Arabs and Muslims. That's extremely important to mention it, because in the collective mind of students, or what we call the leftists, is to say that the Arabs colonized on one hand, they are the victims, and the bad settlers on the other side, amongst whom the Jews.
En harmonie dans le monde arabe.
Voilà, c'est ça. C'était la nostalgie heureuse.
And
Reprendre un peu ce que tu
to
dis,
piggyback on what you're saying, when we negotiated at the Knesset, we were helped by Senator Jerry Nadler from New York, who's a Democrat deputy and who helped us. And so he spoke, saying that when he introduced him to Ben Gurion, when he arrived, he came not as an American senator, and the young lady asked him, "What are you coming for from Israel?" "I'm going to a conference with Jewish refugees." And she said, "Oh, I didn't know there were Jewish refugees. We don't even know our own history."
Alors, je vous fais une confidence, la dame
To
qui
be honest,
préparait
the lady
l'interview a pensé que
who
vous
prepared the
m'interviewez, mais
interview
à 24,
did not
mais ça
even
n'est
know
pas
the
l'histoire.
history
I-24.
at
I-24,
even
c'est quand
4.
même,
At
on a quand même ces
I-24.
livres qui ont sorti
All
sont des
these
sources
books that
incroyables
were released
d'histoire.
are incredible
Tu les
sources
as
of
vus, tu as déjà ce qu'on a
stories.
produit sur
We had what we had produced on the
bien
four
sûr.
countries.
Ils sont sur le
They're
site
on the
web,
website.
ils pourront être
They can be
téléchargés. C'est vraiment une
downloaded.
source
It
historique
really is an
Oui.
exceptional
Ouais,
historical
non,
resource.
vous avez fait un
Yes, you did
super boulot.
an
Je suis appuyé
extraordinary
sur votre
work,
travail
and
aussi,
I
évidemment, pour les
helped
sources
myself with your
juridiques,
work
parce que ça
specifically
sert à
for
rien de
legal
parler
sources, because
d'informations si
there's no point in
on ne
talking
donne pas
about
la source.
information if you don't give
Donc
the
en fait, il
source.
fallait
So we had to
impérativement
give the
donner les
source,
sources.
and
Et
we
en fait, on
see that
voit,
I'm
je ne vais
not
pas refaire
going
tout
to redo
l'historique
the
de
whole
l'annexation des
history
Arabes,
of
toute la
Arabic
déclaration
nationalism with
antisémite
all their
et nazie. C'est pas
anti-Semitic and
l'objet.
pro-Nazi
Mais si
statements.
on va
That's
se
not
baser d'un point de vue
the
juridique.
object.
Et d'un point de vue
But
juridique, quand on se
on a
base sur la
legal
déclaration de
point of
principe
view,
de la
when
Ligue
we
arabe de
base on the
47, c'est une
statement
invitation
of
à
the Arab
l'épuration
League of
ethnique des
1947,
Juifs
it's an
et et à
invitation
leur
to
spoliation. C'est
ethnic
clair, net
cleansing
et
of
sans
Jews,
aucune ambiguïté
and
possible.
it's
Ils
clear and
appellent
there's no
explicitement à confisquer
ambiguity.
les biens
They
des Juifs
prompt
et ils demandent aux
explicitly
Juifs
to take
de
away
prouver que nous
the
n'avions pas
asset
de
to the
lien
Jews, and to
avec les
prove that we
sionistes à l'époque.
had
Allez
no
prouver
link
ça.
to the Zionists
Hein.
at the time.
C'est une
So
preuve
it's a
négative,
good,
c'est impossible à rapporter.
it's a
Donc en fait, vous
negative
pouvez nous inculper comme il voulait.
evidence.
Vous avez Hal Pasha,
It's
par exemple, que vous
impossible to
citiez dans
prove.
votre travail
You
aussi.
have Hal
Hal
Pasha
Pasha,
as well, who
qui
is
est
the
l'équivalent,
equivalent,
qui était
who was
un homme politique
a
de premier plan
politician,
égyptien, qui à la
an
préliminaire de
Egyptian
l'ONU, c'est comme
politician,
si
and
Macron
who
allait dire
it's
à
as if
l'ONU
Macron
que le
went to
conflit,
the
que si
UN and tell
les
that if
Occidentaux
Western people
proposaient un partage de
accepted
la
to
Palestine
share of
actuelle. Et
Palestine in
l'accès là
48,
aurait de graves
there would
répercussions
be
sur les liens d'humanité
serious
et qui pourraient massacrer
ramifications on
essentiellement
1
les
million Jews that would
Israéliens
be
aujourd'hui,
massacred. Can you imagine
indifférents entre la France et la Russie.
you have
Je compare pas la
conflict
Russie, c'est pas ce
between
que je
France
dis.
and Russia? I'm not
Mais
comparing
juste
with
vous
Russia,
imaginez
but
un
imagine
conflit
a
entre la
conflict
France
between
et la
France
Russie et
and Russia,
Macron qui va
and
dire
Macron who
à
would
l'Assemblée
tell
des élus,
UN, be careful
attention,
if
si
you
vous voulez
protect
protéger la
Russia or
Russie
if you
ou si
don't
vous ne
want
voulez
to
pas la
condemn it,
condamner,
we're
nous
going to
allons massacrer les
massacre
Juifs
the
et les
Russians
Russes et
and
les
the
Orthodoxes
Orthodox
en
in France.
France.
That's
Enfin,
crazy.
c'est délirant.
It's
C'est
sick.
sec.
It's
C'est
sick. It's
malade. C'est
absolutely
malade.
Bien
sick.
sûr, bien sûr,
Of course.
bien sûr. Et donc nous,
Bon,
notre
après,
objectif,
It's
c'est la
not the
même époque.
same time.
Peut-être que depuis, les
Euh,
temps ont un peu
Maybe things
évolué.
have evolved, quote unquote,
regarde,
since then.
plus ça
The more it
change.
changes, the more it's the same.
non mais
Ok, parfait.
je
I
regardais le
was
foot parce que
watching
j'aime bien le foot.
soccer.
J'ai
I
le cœur
like
brisé parce que c'est le Qatar qui a repris le
soccer,
Paris
and
Saint-Germain.
I'm
Mais il
brokenhearted
y a un
because
joueur russe
Qatar
dans
went
l'équipe du
against
PSG qui est gardien de but.
Paris
Je vous
Saint-Germain,
assure, il a
and
été
there was
acclamé
a
par tout le
girl who
public
was
Paris un samedi soir.
applauded
Tout le
by
public.
the
Personne n'a sifflé
everybody.
ou quoi que ce soit. J'ai
Nobody
ri une
whistled. I
seconde si
can
ça avait
only
été un
imagine if
Israélien
it
qui
were a
marque but.
Jew or an
Ouais,
Israeli. He
Il
would
aurait
have
été
been
hué,
booed.
complètement hué.
Bah, il
He
serait
would
pas
not
rentré dans
have been
l'équipe sur
on
ce
the. He
terrain-là à
would not have been
7h54,
in
en
the
fait.
En plus,
team on
voilà.
the
Donc vous
team.
voyez, ça, en fait, Sylvain a raison, ça n'a pas
So
changé.
in fact, Sylvain's
moi
right.
je vois
Nothing
le
changed. I
Canada qui
see
est un pays
Canada, which
extraordinaire.
was an
On,
extraordinary
on est venu
country. We
ici
came here to
pour avoir
have
la paix.
peace, and
Mais ils ont
now
tous
we
des
still
problèmes
have
incroyables. C'est
incredible
pas des problèmes
problems.
que j'ai connus. Nous avons des
We have
gouvernements qui
governments who are
sont anti-Israël.
anti-Israel.
C'est un
There's a
contexte
very
très
difficult
difficile.
context.
Peut-être une
When
anecdote,
I
lorsque
was
j'étais
president
président
of
de
the
la Confédération,
federation,
on était
we were
en
in
contact
direct
direct avec les
contact with
services de
security
sécurité.
services,
Et
and
un jour,
one day we
on a
asked
demandé aux services de
the
renseignement canadiens de
Canadian
nous donner
intelligence
une idée sur
services to give
l'envergure
us
du
an
danger pour les
idea
juifs.
of the
Et il m'a dit
importance
la
of the
chose suivante.
danger for the Jewish
Sur une
community. He
échelle
told me the
de 1 à
following:
5,
on a scale of 1 to
vous êtes à
5, you're
4.
at 4,
Et
and
5, c'est
5
quand un
is when
camion
there's a
d'explosifs se dirige vers
truck
votre
full of
bâtiment.
explosive drives towards your
Ça,
building.
c'est l'évaluation des services
This
de
is the
renseignement canadiens.
assessment of the Canadian
Nous
intelligence
avons des
services. We
écoles qui ont
have
été,
schools that have been
comment dirais-je, mis en
um,
feu, des cimetières
put in
vandalisés.
fire,
Je ne sais pas,
vandalized
il y a un
cemeteries.
mois, dans une école juive, on voit des traces de
In
balles
a Jewish school, we
brûlées.
have some bullets
C'est quoi? Et
in the
aujourd'hui, à la
wall. And
fédération,
today at the
nous avons
Federation,
tout un système
we
avec
created a
Israël.
whole
On se
system
croirait
with
vraiment
Israeli.
à la NASA, hein, avec les
We
caméras de
could think that we're
sécurité
at
qui protègent toute
NASA
la
with
communauté juive
security
dans Montréal.
cameras protecting the Jewish
Évidemment que
community
nous
in
avons une communauté
Montreal.
qui
And of
est
course,
très
we
bien
have a very
organisée,
well
très
organized
bien
committee and
soutenue par
very
Israël,
well
qui nous
financially
permet d'avoir ce genre
supported
d'action.
that enables us to have
Mais
this sort of
si on m'avait
action.
dit il y
But
a 20
if
ans que le Canada
we
ne serait
had
plus là
told
pour
us
protéger nos
20 years
synagogues,
ago
etc.,
that we would have to now protect our synagogues, we would not have believed it. It's terrible.
ouais, ouais.
En fait, c'est la poursuite
It's the
de
follow-up
ce
of
qui se
what was
passait
happening in
dans les
Arab
pays
country
arabes
and
et d'Europe.
Iran.
Moi,
My
ma
mother in
mère en
Tunisia,
Tunisie,
it was
c'était ça. En
that.
fait, le climat
The
devenait
climate
étouffant.
was
Il n'y a pas eu de loi
stifling.
d'expulsion des Juifs de Tunisie,
There were
mais
no
le climat
law
était
on
étouffant.
the
Vous ne pouvez pas
deportation
sortir
of Jews
sans enjeu de
in
bagarre, sans pour les
Tunisia, but
femmes,
you could not
sans se faire
go out
embêter.
without fighting, without
Voilà.
J'ai
being
passé
hassled.
ma
I
jeunesse,
spent my
ouais, parce
youth,
que je suis
and you can say
gentil,
I'm someone
mais
who's
j'ai passé ma
nice,
jeunesse à me bagarrer.
but I spent my
À
whole
me
youth
bagarrer,
fighting,
point,
fist
voilà.
fighting,
Mais
constantly.
apparemment, au Maroc, ça
Well,
dépendait de la
apparently in
région.
Morocco, it depended
On a eu
on
un
the
témoignage
region.
dans
We
ce
had
cycle
a
de cours de
testimony from
Madame
Madame
Aflalou qui était
Aflalou,
très
who
très
was
passionnant,
absolutely
où elle relatait le fait
very
que
exciting.
à
And she
Fès,
was saying that
c'était
in Fez,
beaucoup
it was
plus
a lot more
difficile d'être
difficult to be
juif, dû
Jewish
à
Oui, oui.
différents facteurs en fait, qu'à Gaza ou à
than in
Essaouira,
Gaza or
où
Essaouira.
enfin,
Of
bien
course,
sûr
there
qu'il y a
were
eu des tensions à
tensions
partir de la
once
création de
the
l'État juif en
Jewish
papier
state
en
was
France,
created, even
mais
more,
c'était
but
pas exactement
it
la même
wasn't
chose.
exactly the
Et
same.
moi, ma
My
famille
family
est
is Moroccan,
marocaine,
and they
et
tell
ils me
me,
disent
in
en fait,
fact,
il y a
there
quelque chose,
was
un
more
implicite à
of an
Gaza et
implicit in
Essaouira,
Gaza as well, an
antisémite, qui
anti-Semitic
était moins
implicit
voilà
climate that
assumé,
was not
alors que
quite
dans les
recognized,
montagnes,
whereas in the
Fès,
mountain,
Meknès,
Fez,
etc.,
Meknès,
c'était
etc., it
complètement
was
assumé et
completely
entré dans la vie
um,
publique de manière
On a eu des pogroms, des gros
assumed.
pogroms au Maroc. Hein.
À Fès,
We had
en
pogroms in
Algérie,
Fès,
Morocco, yeah,
ouais.
in Fez in 1912,
à Oujda
at
aussi,
Oujda as well, and in
Djerba,
Jebera,
si je ne me trompe pas sur le
if
nom de
I'm
la
not
ville, c'est
mistaken,
Oujda et
Oujda and
Djerba aussi
Jebera
en
in 1948
1948.
as well.
Ouais, such is life.
Yep,
Such is life.
Such is life.
Donc,
Okay, perfect.
Parfait.
Okay, well,
Bon, si
Madame Philipson or other
d'autres
people,
personnes,
maybe?
peut-être,
Ariana
Cuevas,
Cuevas,
peut-être
maybe
vous avez
you
des
have
questions, je
questions, I
sais
don't
pas.
know. Otherwise,
Sinon,
we're just
on va
going to end
s'arrêter.
the session.
Monsieur
Monsieur
Abitbol, vous avez
Abitbol,
une
you have
autre
another meeting
réunion?
in 13
13
minutes.
minutes.
Okay.
Bon, on va,
so that it will give you time to breathe. Chag Sameach, and thank you, everybody.
Je veux juste terminer par une réflexion. J'arrive d'un voyage
I come back from a trip to West Africa. I was in Ghana and in Sierra Leone for an agricultural project. And I saw human misery you cannot even imagine, so much poverty. And I took some pictures of these kids who were barefoot, naked, and I sent that to my colleague at JJAC. And Jack Vash answered, there are people who are not bombing anything. They're there, they're poor, and they live their life. But it's very heartbreaking. And then you have those assholes who are constantly bothering us. This is true poverty, true misery. Well, everything passes, let's hope. See you soon. Thank you very much. Thank you. See you soon. Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Bye, guys.